Welcome to the Wade Center Podcast,
a podcast of Wheaton College.
This is the Wade Center Podcast. I'm Jim Beitler, here once again with Aaron Hill.
Hey.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any time at all, you're going to recognize our guests, the former podcast co-hosts, Crystal L. Downing and David C. Downing. Welcome.
Hey.
Glad to be here.
The Downings, as listeners probably know, were co-directors of the Wade Center and co-holders of the Marion E. Wade Chair in Christian Thought from 2018 to 2024. I'm going to say a little bit about you, even though our listeners may know. David has written 4 scholarly books on Lewis, edited 2 best-selling collections of Lewis's thoughts on reading and writing, both of which were published by Harper One, and he's written a historical novel called Looking for the King. And Crystal is the author of 6 books, including Subversive, Christ, Culture, and the Shocking Dorothy L. Sayers, and Changing Signs of Truth, both of which received Publishers Weekly starred reviews. Her most recent book, one that we want to talk about today, is The Wages of Cinema, great title, A Christian Aesthetic of Film in Conversation with Dorothy L. Sayers. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Welcome
Great
back.
to be here. Yes.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear a little bit about what you've been up to for the past year. So what's been going on in your lives?
Well, we retired at the end of June last year, so we're coming up on 1 full year of retirement.
Oh, my gosh.
So we very quickly left the state. The feds are after us. So moved to Boulder, Colorado. We both have family in the Front Range there, Denver, Fort Collins, and Colorado Springs. And we stayed busy with speaking and writing projects.
Yeah.
Not so much with administration and paper grading. So that's what we're retired from.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, should we jump in and talk a little bit about the books?
Yeah.
Crystal, let's start with yours.
Okay.
The Wages of Cinema. It's a great title, as I said. Can you talk a little bit about the double meaning of that, this connection between sin and cinema, and how you're speaking into that?
Well, partly I wanted to have a theological allusion in the title because it is something that has really never been done before. Well, I know it's never been done before, is to talk about film theory, the history of film, but in relationship to the Christian aesthetic that Dorothy L. Sayers developed. And it's an odd imbrication of different theorists and Sayers, but what I prove is that what Sayers says in Mind of the Maker is entirely illustrated by film theory. And most Christians who write books on film, they make no mention of film theory. They make no mention of the history of film. And all they do is talk about the stories in film. This one seminary professor actually in a book on film says in film, story is everything. And almost any film theorist you talk about who is well known will repudiate that statement. And so it's so weird that Christians who would be appalled at someone who would write a book on Christianity who has never studied theology, has never studied the history of Christianity, yet write books on film where they don't even know the field they're writing about. So I have another book that is studied at universities across the country called Salvation from Cinema, but it is focused more on multiple religions and how religion becomes manifest in film. And in fact, the publisher asked me to take out my explicit Christian material to spread it around many religions. So that was very fun for me in that I had to use guerrilla tactics to prove that Christianity supersedes all other religions.
A Hindu understanding of The Hangover. Was that one chapter?
So this one then is explicitly for Christians. And of course, Christians get the pun, the wages of cinema. When I've mentioned it, like I might be somewhere and said, oh, well, I'm just finishing up a book. And they go, oh, what's it called? The Wages of Cinema. And they go, well, why are you concerned about how much money that cinema makes? You know, they just don't get the pun.
I want Crystal to follow up with a book on Christian nutrition called The Wages of Cinnabon. So we think there's a lot of
You could just keep
possibilities
rolling
here.
with
I
it.
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Crystal, can you talk a little bit about Sayers' focus on aesthetics, and then maybe why do you think Christians tend to focus so much on story and not on these other aspects
The
of film theory?
irony of it is Christians essentially they reduce film to a content delivery system.
Gotcha.
And that's very similar to Docetism, which is a heresy in the early church, which reduced Jesus to a content delivery system. In other words, they didn't focus on Jesus as God incarnate, Jesus as a flesh and blood medium. Jesus is the medium of our salvation. And Sayers actually used the word Docetism to describe people's response to her radio plays about Jesus, because Christians were appalled that she didn't use King James English.
Yeah.
They were appalled that she made the disciples seem like flesh and blood people, that she made Jesus seem like a flesh and blood person. And you go, he was! I mean, this is the fundamental doctrine of Christianity, that Jesus was God incarnate. So I borrowed Sayers' idea of the problem of Docetism, especially among Protestants. You know, there was kind of a Protestant prejudice against images, and coming from the Puritans, the British Puritans in the 17th century. And she recognized the importance of the medium, but also something nobody has talked about before because they didn't know about it. Sayers loved cinema. In the 4-volume collection of the letters of Dorothy Sayers, the editor left out every single letter where Sayers praises cinema.
Really?
Yes. And so at the Wade, I mean, the Wade is really the most comprehensive collection of Sayers materials in the world.
Yeah.
And I was already making these discoveries before David and I were asked to be co-directors. And I was discovering all the Sayers would actually draw, reproduce for her parents particular shots from films she liked.
Oh, wow.
And so she not only has a Christian aesthetic that parallels the aesthetic of film theorists, but she understands cinema. She wanted to be a screenwriter before she became famous as a detective fiction writer. So she's the perfect person to draw into conversation about how a Christian aesthetic can illuminate the artistry of film rather than reducing it to a content delivery system.
Yeah, she's a great guide in this book. I mean, we get Sayers' biography, we get her history with the film, with cinema, and then we, of course, get the theology and the film theory. It's a wonderful blend of bringing all of these things together. And at in the coda, you do something really interesting. You talk about Sayers and her relationship with film. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. In fact, one of the fun things for me is to discover the woman who basically was the preeminent screenwriter in Hollywood during the silent film period. Her name is June Mathis, and I read then a biography. So what I did too is every person that had some connection with Sayers and cinema, I read their biographies. to be able to get more clarity, to see the parallels between film theory and a Christian aesthetic. And the woman who says very similar things to Sayers, and Sayers was committed to the integrity of work, and every filmmaker whose films today are considered pieces of art are committed to the integrity of work. I found good data to support the idea that she socialized with Alfred Hitchcock, who is one of the great film directors, as you know, because her best friend wrote dialogue for Alfred Hitchcock and socialized. And since Sayers had interest in film, I'm sure that happened.
Wow.
Also, when biographers were saying, after Sayers had a really bad experience with a production company that made a film, they commissioned her to write a story that they could make a film of. And it was just a horrible, horrible film. It wasn't an artistic film. And so these biographers say, after this experience, Sayers had nothing more to do with film. That's wrong. If you read her unpublished letters, and one of them that I discovered, this was so exciting to discover at the Wade. I mean, the Wade is, for anybody who likes learning things, the Wade is the most wonderful place to be because you're just reading through letters and you're going. And sometimes it would be hard for me not to kind of squeal when I was in the reading room. You know, I'm surrounded by all these other scholars. Sayers met with the preeminent film director in England in the 1940s. He mentored Martin Scorsese.
Oh, wow.
He mentored Francis Ford Coppola. He mentored David Lean, some of the most significant filmmakers of the 20th century. And he liked Sayers and was talking to her. I found in this unpublished letter about doing film adaptations of The Nine Tailors and of Murder Must Advertise, two of these pieces. And this was in 1947. And, you know, I'm just flipping through letters, and I saw the insignia on the personalized stationery, and I go, Michael Powell. You know, Michael Powell appears in every history of film book that is published.
Why didn't those films get made that they talked about?
Yeah.
That, I could not find the reason for that. Partly, when he met with her is right when she started researching and translating Dante. And so Dante became the passion of the last decade of her life. And I think she just didn't have the time to follow through.
Do you think if she hadn't have pursued that she may have gotten more into film? I writing for film and stuff?
Yeah, well, because she actually did write. She wrote some film scenarios in the 1920s. And they didn't go anywhere because she was writing a film adaptation of a novel. And it turns out someone else got the rights and made the film adaptation. And it was this woman who was the preeminent screenwriter, director in the 1920s. And I started alluding to her earlier, but she was born in Leadville, Colorado. So when we get back home, I've already told David one of our first trips is to go to Leadville, Colorado.
Where's Leadville,
I've
Colorado?
gone to England and gone to all the houses where Sayers lived. It's in the mountains, in Colorado.
Up by the ski slopes.
Yeah, and it's an old historic town. So, and I'm going to see if I'm going to find the house that this woman who sounds a lot like Dorothy Sayers, where she lived. Yeah.
Sounds interesting. Sliding doors. It's like Dorothy Sayers' alternative life.
That's right.
Oh,
yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
We need an addendum to her letters that include all the stuff on cinema.
Yeah. Well, I've put a lot of the quotations into my book, And of course, to quote unpublished, I
Yeah.
put the Wade and what file it's in
Oh,
and
okay.
the
So you're saying she was
manuscript
the
number.
original inspiration for Yoda? Are you sure about that?
Crystal, how did you get interested in film? What was?
Oh.
Do you remember the first film that you saw, or first movie you saw, and
I do remember
where did
the
the passion come from?
partly because I grew up in a fundagelical background where movies were verboten. And then my father had heard about this movie called Ben-Hur that had positive depictions of Jesus.
Mhm.
And he took our whole family into San Francisco. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area to see this movie. So to drive all the way, it was like 25-minute drive to see a movie. And I remember being blown away by it. David then taught a film course at his college. Did you teach it in Santa Barbara or just in
I
Pennsylvania?
did both places, but you should go back to our friend in college who did all his art films in a Montessori school. You remember Paul? We saw 400 Blows.
That's right.
Yeah,
We had this great group of friends when we lived in Santa Barbara, and he had a passion for the artistry of film, and so he would just show films. And so this is before DVDs or streaming services. I'm old, and he
16 millimeter print.
So is this
Yeah, they were-
is this before the internet?
it is.
Yeah.
Actually, it is.
It is.
Yes.
So he would rent spaces and show artistic films.
Mm.
And he was going to film festivals, and he helped sponsor the Santa Barbara Film Festival. So this group of friends, there were 4 couples, and we just helped him. He rented the space, and he later got a good space that was an old Pentecostal church in Santa Barbara, and we would sell refreshments out of the baptismal space. It was at the side of the stage. But then after he showed a film, the 4 of us couples would get together at one of our houses and discuss the film.
Oh,
And sometimes he would preview the film on, the old-fashioned 36 millimeter,
16 millimeter, yeah.
16 millimeter, excuse me, projectors. And one time the film got loose from the projector, and it got into the guacamole, and
The
so he had to,
take-up reel stopped spinning, so the entire film
Oh, it just started
was piling
spilling
up
it out
on the floor.
Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
It was like
And-
6 feet of coiled film. Yeah.
These were all very intelligent people. Most of us were English majors, and
Yeah.
so we were trained to analyze both form and content, which
Mm.
is essential to the understanding of film. So thank you for reminding me
Yeah,
about
that
that.
was both of us.
I
important
credited
influence.
that group in my other film book. But since this focus was more on Sayers.
Some film restoration person is like, wow, this is the green print of this movie.
exactly. An early attempt at colorization.
Yeah.
so one of the things this book does is it traces the religious roots of
Yes.
cinema. I wonder if I'm sure our listeners would be interested in that.
Right. Since many may have grown up in fundagelical backgrounds as I did, where film was verboten. As Dorothy Sayers says, theater is religious in origin. And she actually said, and I quote this in the book, this is a bit shocking. That's why I named my last book Subversive, the Dorothy L. Sayers story. But she said she thought some people would have a more astute understanding of human nature by reading Sophocles and Aeschylus than they would by reading their Bibles cover
Ooh.
to cover.
Hmm.
But she puts it in the context. After all, the Pharisees knew their Bible cover
I
to
see,
cover, but it just turned them into legalists.
Yeah.
And many people who know the New Testament cover to cover are legalists.
Yeah.
So she, of course, believed the Christian message, and that's the irony when Christians protested her plays about Jesus, because she was just giving the gospel. She included all the miracles, God's death and resurrection through the medium of Jesus Christ and his post-resurrection appearances. But it wasn't King James English. It's a type of idolatry of the language. You don't idolize the language, it's the message. And the significant thing is that many people came to Christ because of Sayers' radio plays.
It's an interesting cultural commentary that when The Chosen came on, Christians welcomed it. Here's an amplified New Testament for film. And they said, if anybody's showing interest in Christianity and showing a certain amount of respect for the original stories, would seem to welcome to most Christians. But at the time you're talking about, any variation on the King James Version was considered blasphemous, I guess.
Right. But to get back to the origins of cinema, the origins of cinema are in theater. Most of the early directors and studio heads got their start in theater. And theater started as a religious rite. It was in Athens, rituals in honor of Dionysus, who is a god that died and rose again. And I read one scholar who suggested that Jesus actually may have been involved in the construction of a theater 4 miles outside of Nazareth, because his father was a carpenter, but in that area, you don't have as much wood as you have stone. And so Jesus uses the Greek term for actor. The Greek term for actor was hypocritai. So when he calls the Pharisees hypocritai, he's just saying, you're just putting on an act. And Paul alludes to Greek theater in his writings. So theater is important to our understanding of the New Testament. And even when Tertullian coined the word Trinity in around 200 AD, he used the word in Latin, the word for the mask that actors always wore in Greek and Latin and Roman theater. It was called personae. So Tertullian describes the Trinity as un substantia tres personae. And he was just borrowing this word from theater.
Yeah.
So theater is so important to Christianity. And it's kind of ironic that some Christian colleges don't have a dedicated theater space, because theater, after the fall of the Roman Empire, it was the Christian church that revived theater. Medieval drama was based on Bible stories and saints' plays. And when I taught medieval drama at UCLA, I had my students, I required them to read the story in a Bible, and I just told them, go to any church, they'll give you a Bible for free. And they all got them, and then they would read the medieval drama, so like Noah's Ark. And then we would talk about, okay, what's interesting about medieval culture? How did they interpret this Bible story? And medieval drama goes from creation through Jesus' death and resurrection. So at the end of this course, and I had to be very careful. This is a secular university. I did not preach the gospel. I just allowed the medieval drama to speak and allow the students to speak. When we reviewed for the final, one of my students, and what I did is I told all these students, okay, to review, why don't you share what was your favorite thing about the class? Thinking some would talk about how Noah and his wife are hitting each other because she doesn't want to get on the ark, and the times at the crucifixion when the Romans are putting Jesus on the cross, this medieval, and it was priests who were writing these plays. They couldn't get his arms stretched enough, and they're trying to get the nail in, and they can't get the base of the cross into a hole, and so it's exacerbating the suffering of Christ. But then he says, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. And so it gives this humorous, so it's very interesting. But then, we talk about, well, what do you think Jesus really meant by that? And I'm just asking the students. So I go around and say, what did you like most about this class? And one student said, before I took this class, I thought Christianity, this is the word he used, and I won't use it, but he essentially said, before I took this class, I thought Christianity was BS. You fill in the words.
Uh-huh.
Before I took this class, I thought Christianity was BS. But now I realize how profound it is. And every student, they went around and said, yes, I had no idea about the profundity of Christianity. And one young woman came to my class, to my office afterwards, and she said, I had a baby at age 14. I was shunned by my family, but now I know Jesus still loves me after taking this course.
Wow.
So, yeah, medieval drama is profoundly Christian. So, anyway.
BS stands for bold speculation.
Oh, thank you, David. I never knew what he meant. So Sayers loved theater, saw its religious power, and since most of the initial people in the making of film were initially in theater, there is great connection. But then that created a problem because how was cinema going to separate itself from theater? Film had a stigma. And so I play with something that Sayers says, where she writes, I saw in theater all the stigmata of a real and living church.
What a line.
It is a wonderful line, and it makes sense. In fact, more churches should think this is what the church should be, like a theater company. Because when you're putting on a play, every single member of the production, first of all, they have a similar goal as the church does, to worship and our Lord Jesus Christ and to communicate to the gospel message to others. But a theater troupe has a common goal, and every single person is important. Not just the director, not just the star of the staged show, because no matter how good the direction is and the star is, if your lighting technician or your sound technician isn't doing their job, it's a failure.
Yeah.
And so that's such a wonderful way to think of Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12 about, we all have different gifts, but we're one body that contributes to this. And so then you could say the same about cinema. The film editor is just as, in fact, many would say more important than the director. But what makes film different? What is the stigmata of film? Because theater has the stigmata of living incarnated bodies on stage. So I explored that. You'll have to read the book to see what the stigmata of film is.
And our listeners should definitely get a copy of the book. It is really a fascinating book. Thank you so much for writing it. And by the way, listeners, you can also watch Crystal give a talk about this book on our YouTube, on the Wade's YouTube channel. So go over there and check that out as well.
Okay. Thanks.
David, let's talk about your projects. You've been working on this, it's really a series at this point with Harper One.
It turned into a series, that's correct. The first one was called The Reading Life, about his opinions on just the act of reading. Came out 2019. People were astounded in one excerpt. He says his perfect day involves 8 hours of reading. So people were amazed by that. I tell my students that, and They consider 8 minutes of reading to be the correct proportion.
Yeah.
So the reading life was the first one. The second one was C.S. Lewis on writing and writers.
Yeah.
And some of the things that stood out were his high opinion of some writers and low opinion of others. Of Jane Austen, he said, her novels only have two faults. They're too short and too few, which is a nice sort of compliment.
That's great.
Of T.H. White, The Sword and the Stone, he said, this book is the product of a sad, shabby little mind. And
Ouch.
yeah, I just read that for the first time when I was grading student papers, and I came across a weak paper, and I wanted to say, no, I can't. I'm going to back off. So I wrote one on his opinions about the reading life, one on writing and writers. People thought I was going to do one on arithmetic, reading, writing, C.S. Lewis on arithmetic. But no, this third one is on C.S. Lewis, Letters on Living the Faith. I went through his 3,500 pages of personal letters and picked out spiritual advice, commiserating with other people on their journey. And just, we are so familiar with his insights in his published books, but it's amazing how some of his best insights were written just to one person at one particular time.
Yeah.
So I tried to harvest those and put them between two
And
covers.
it's really intimidating to go, oh, there's so much great stuff in his letters. And then you get like volume 1 of his letters.
Right.
And it's this big, thick tome. And you're like, I guess I'll sit down on a Saturday afternoon and just read. So yeah, you actually going through and reading all 3 volumes, people don't understand how much of a assistance that is to actually go through.
Yeah, that was the idea, is to find all these nuggets of wisdom and insight and put them in a more accessible
It would be
format.
like being tasked to be like, well, David had some really great tweets and posts on social media. And then you're like, okay, well, I have to scroll through years and years and years and years worth of posts to find the gold, so.
For me, that's always trying to find somebody's phone number. I remember at some point they sent me their phone number, and I go,
it's in here somewhere.
Yeah.
So when does that book come out?
January of 26.
We'll have you back to the Wade to talk about that, hopefully.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, I'd really enjoy that.
Good. Looking forward to that. What about your time at the Wade Center? Can you talk a little bit for our listeners about, if they've never visited the Wade, why should they come? Why should they come to the Wade? Crystal, you alluded to that a little bit.
Yeah, the treasures you can discover. And especially, the Wade has 2,500 books that C.S. Lewis owned. And you can see his annotations in the books. And I know Jim is doing some scholarship study on those. But you discover what Lewis really thought. Because when he's writing a book review, he'll say, this author does not consider the precedence to this philosophical issue. And then you look at the book that Lewis owned, and in the margin, he'll write, this man is a fool. My favorite was seeing the end of Lord Byron's Don Juan, which is how the British pronounce it. And at the very end of the book, Lewis writes, never again. And I know why, because Lord Byron made fun of Wordsworth and Coleridge in Don Juan, and Lewis loved Wordsworth. So that is just fun in and of itself to get the real personality of Lewis.
Yeah.
And then there's all this unpublished material by Sayers as well as the other authors. It's just a joy. You take over, David. You can say.
Well, I agree with all that, of course. I used to say you'll come for the books and you'll stay for the people.
Yes.
We met so many interesting people in our 6 years at the Wade. Some of them Wheaton faculty and staff got to know, like Jim and Aaron. Other people just walk in the door and they're doing a new project you never heard of before.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the kindred spirits that tend to collect at the Wade Center and around Wheaton in general. We've only been here for a week, and we've had meals, at least 2 meals a day with people that we haven't seen in a year. So it's a little bit of both. It's both the physical resources and the human resources here in this area.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say, one of the things I love about the Wade, you're talking about the books, Crystal, is I think a lot of people don't realize is that all of the scholarly articles that the authors published, and articles that people associated with them published are also stored at the Wade.
Yes.
So with some of the research projects that I was doing when I was in grad school, you would find Lewis in a letter refers to going to see a play that one of his friends wrote. And then you discover that that play is at the Wade Center, stored in one of these filing cabinets. And so it's this idea of like, you can see this reference in a book or something maybe you read, and you could go see the source where he wrote that. But then there's also, all these academic articles that maybe haven't been compiled into something that's been published. It's sort of like peeling back the curtain at the end of The Wizard of Oz and discovering, like there's
That's a good analogy.
this whole other thing behind there. And so for me, I think the most fascinating thing about the Wade is the depth of the stuff that's behind it. It's like, marveling at an iceberg and you just see the top of it and you don't realize how much is underneath. So
When I was writing my book on the Ransom trilogy, I ran across this source at the Wade called Parma Elderlamberon. And I don't remember what it means in Elvish, but it's about Tolkien studies.
Oh.
I found an article I sort of liked, but I said, I'm definitely going to quote that. I need to see Parma Elderlamberon in my bibliography.
Yeah.
So that is there.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
Go look for that.
Yeah.
One last question, and that is Inkling studies, Lewis studies, Sayers studies. What do you think those areas of scholarship need at the present moment? I know that's a huge question, but I'm really interested in your thoughts about it.
Well, Holly Ordway says there are a lot more Tolkien letters that haven't come to the surface. Originally, there's a new edition of Tolkien's letters, which is quite a bit thicker. Serena Higgins, you should ask her that question. She came up with like 25 topics that need to be explored more fully on all 7 of the authors.
Yeah.
That was a good starting place. Brenton Dickinson, last time he was at the Bodleian, the story on Leaf by Niggle is that Tolkien says, I woke up one morning and the story came to me and I wrote it down that afternoon, which is not at all his compositional style.
Yeah.
And Brenton says last time he was at the Bodleian, he saw a big box that said Leaf by Niggle. And it looked like there were 10 or 12 drafts in there.
Yeah.
So there's a dissertation right there, I think.
Yeah.
So those are some ones I would think of in terms of ongoing studies.
That's good.
Cat got your tongue?
I'm just gonna put it out there. I think in just about every episode that I did with you guys, there was some sort of insight where David or Crystal would mention something that needed to be researched, and we were like, that sounds like a PhD dissertation for us. And
somebody should go through all of the episodes and make a list.
Right.
Yes.
All
I know.
of the unfinished projects.
yeah, because it's literally like listening to David and Crystal talking, and then they all of a sudden they realize, oh yeah, somebody should look into that or whatever. And so yeah, there's a lot of gold in them Dar Hills.
What's interesting is you try to predict what needs to be done, and then Diana Glyer comes up with the company they keep, which proves that they really were very collaborative. The wisdom on the Inklings is they didn't influence each other.
Yeah.
So a topic that people thought didn't need doing, we all thought that they themselves said, he gave me encouragement, but he didn't influence me. And so she overturned that assumption.
Yeah.
So sometimes the best project is the one that nobody predicted until a particular scholar came up with that idea.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, Christians, too, are now recognizing the importance of the arts. And some people have heard of Makoto Fujimura, who wrote a book on art and faith that was published by Yale University Press in 2020. And he is an artist, but an earnest Christian. And more people are realizing art is a way to sneak past watchful dragons, as Lewis would put it. And of course, Sayers had her Christian aesthetic, and Fujimura in this Yale University Press starts his book by referring to Dorothy Sayers. So she is finally coming into her own, but then both Lewis and Sayers were heavily influenced by G.K. Chesterton, and more can be done about Chesterton. And another fun thing the Wade has is we have Chesterton on film with his wife waving from their house. And Chesterton himself was in a film that people don't know, a film directed by J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan.
Wow.
So there's just all these fun little insights that can be jumping off points.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's totally free to come to the Wade and to study in
For now.
It'll stay free.
Can I ask you guys a little bit more a philosophical take on the same thing of Jim's question? But why should people continue to study the Wade scholars? Why continue to write books about Dorothy Sayers and the wages of cinema? Why should we continue to study them? Why not move on to other things or talk about other stuff? They're literally from another century at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I saw somebody online make a post about they were born in this century, and this idea that it's like in the past. Why should they continue to study Wade authors? Why should we care about them?
Well, the same question could be asked: why continue to study Shakespeare? Or why continue to study medieval drama or the Brontes? And this is true in film as well. I've read some books by Christians who just go to the IMDb and find the films that just won the most awards. And many times, the films that win Academy Awards, they don't last. They aren't considered great artistic classics because they're popular at the time because they're addressing a very contemporary issue, but it was just a momentary obsession of culture at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas the great writers like Shakespeare, which is why, and of course, numerous films have been made of Shakespeare and still are being made. It's because he had this brilliant insight to human nature. And I would say the same about our Wade authors. They understand human nature, but also they understand Christian doctrine. And so they can illuminate the relevance of Christianity to what it means to be human.
Right. Lewis said, all that is not eternal is eternally out of date. And sometimes they stay relevant because there's eternity in the hearts of these books. And I see that over and over again in Boulder. When I'm at Wheaton, I mentioned C.S. Lewis, and someone says, oh, I love that insight on page 37 where he talked about the Greek word. And I was talking to a pastor in Boulder, and he was talking about different kinds of love. And I said, have you ever read The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis? And he says, the Narnia guy? And I go, yeah, the Narnia guy. He wrote other books besides Narnia. And then he came back a month later and said, I read that book and I loved it. Did he write any other good stuff? As a matter of fact, he did. So in some ways, I think the books of our authors sell themselves. You don't really have to come up with a rationale. I would just say, pick up one of these books and read them and see for yourself how relevant they continue to be.
There's a reason why they're still in print.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for coming back to the podcast. Such a joy to have you here.
Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron.
It's so fun to see you guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
The Wade Center podcast is a production of the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. If you enjoy the podcast and the content we offer, please leave us a review on iTunes, tell your friends, and consider making a donation to the Wade. The Wade Center is entirely self-funded. Financial gifts help support the expert services, past collections, and varied programming we offer at no cost. If you have questions about the podcast or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at wade@wheaton.edu or contact us via Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. To learn more about the Wade Center, our 7 British Christian authors, what we offer, and how to make a donation, visit our website at wheaton.edu/Wade.